Hey guys, it's Dreamforce here. You know they say that every time you pick Hanzo in ranked, God kills a Kirin? Well, this is Thorin's channel. And every time you pick Hanzo in ranked, Thorin kills a seagull.
Right, this is episode 16 of Watch the Overture. A show. Here's the thing, Yiska, is like this show has really tested, like, because I have a theory, right, that no one, this is the reason why whenever I find stories about like entrepreneurs and stuff, I'm very interested in their process, because I actually don't believe that anyone ever lived their life forwards the way they would talk about their life in a documentary film. Like, you know, whenever they're talking about the band that they were in that was famous or a company, it's like when they talk, they knew the whole time they were going to succeed. They knew exactly what they were doing. They understood the mechanism of the brand new thing they just created that no one's ever seen before. It's like, really, that just sounds like the comforting stories you tell yourself after you've succeeded as to why it works. So the problem is, normally you're not ever tested in that sense, right? So whenever I told people, Yiska, at the height of when all my content in League of Legends and CS was at its peak, you know, like the maximum amount of viewers, obviously the way I stayed cool is I always had the sort of old school demeanor of like, I don't do it for the views, you know, I do it primarily for myself, and if I'm satisfied, then I can go to sleep easy, you know, at night. And then if it happens to succeed as well then I think myself, you know, I feel very grateful to be in this position and to have acquired the skill set I have. Problem with that is you can say all that and sound brilliant while you're getting all those hits, like, because basically you're succeeding. It's like you're getting all the money, but you're going, I'm not really in it for the money, you know, but I will take all this money that you give me. Yeah, definitely. Just give me all that. So this show has really, it's tested my limits of like, how far will I go just to do something that is sort of like one of those philosophy things of like, if we have a brilliant discussion but no one hears it, did we ever have a brilliant discussion? So we'll test that. We will test the limits of that on this particular show. So this topic, I actually think, is a great example of the sort of topic that isn't discussed very much. I will say in esports generally, like I get mad in my own game, mate, CSGO, we've got loads of writers, loads of people, and everyone is still just obsessed with like the day-to-day of like what happened today, what happened yesterday, basically. So like they'll talk about a team that won the last tournament or a team that's just got a new player now to the ends of the earth. In fact, what's bizarre to me is they will debate for hours what a lineup will look like that they've never seen play, but that they'll have an answer for next week when it plays. They'll debate that as though that was the most interesting topic ever, even though most people are going to have a theory, but then come down to like, but we can't really know. Meanwhile, stuff that's already happened and therefore we could have brilliant discussions about, they don't tend to actually be that interested in digging up, because they always think like, I can have that discussion whenever, or, you know, oh, everyone knows who the best player is, you know. So as much as this might sound like the most bog standard esports topic ever, I've never seen a show that actually did a good job of this topic. So the topic is, who are the greatest players in the history of Overwatch? So basically, obviously, I can already tell you right now, Yiska, the title will be some sort of a pun on GOATs, but obviously not the fucking shit comp. It'll be the GOATs, the greatest of all time, right? So we'll do something with that. So the point of why I set this up, though, is because we're obviously not just going to talk about the Overwatch League. We're going to talk about all of Overwatch. That means, good news, guys, even all those Western players that you all thought were going to be the kings, I told you, like, you know, give me time, give me time, give me time, give me time. I even used to just say, wait till Kesper comes. Didn't even fucking need Kesper. Just all the Korean orgs were able to take care of you guys. But anyway, that means we can even include those guys, because remember, that's the beta period and then season 1. So there's a lot we can include here. So the question is this, Volamel, is, who is the first name that should come to mind? Like, you know, if this was like an infamous like soccer debate, Pele and Maradona, you know, there's those names that have to come off the page immediately. Now for Overwatch, that's not as simple as it was a year ago or 2 years ago, because obviously it's like there's been different people in different eras. So who do you think it should be like the first name that is put forwards?
For me personally, I think just based on historical relevance, you know, being able to consistently play at a certain level, I do think Soon probably fits the bill for being, you know, considered, you know,
So we're going with the angle here of like, you know, longevity and like aggregate performance. Because I mean, put it this way, like I'm going to go ahead and guess you at no point did you actually have Soon as the best player, but you're saying like length of career, spanning Apex and Overwatch. Okay, I get the angle down that one. Okay, so kind of like what we alluded to last episode then, Yiska. Like he's using aggregate there because one of the things that people are going to notice as we have this discussion is that it is mainly people who are gods in Overwatch League, or they were gods in Apex, or they were gods before Apex. It's going to be one of those three, and there's very few people will have the overlap. So what do you think on that one then, Soon, Yiska? So he was going at him in from a longevity angle, but what do you think of this as a name to put forwards?
Well, the thing with Soon is he's also a pretty early beta player, I think.
Yep.
Generally, also, I recently saw the argument made that Soon somehow didn't have the peaks that, for instance, someone like Shorefur had. I think there were times where Soon legitimately could have been in talks for the best player in the world, definitely the best DPS, right? And there's also something to be said about the sophistication of our analysis back then. Like, I think we still had a sort of bias towards DPS because we were not thinking that it's more like tank lines and backlines carrying Overwatch. But yeah, Soon had games he just took over. And yes, a lot of it is also that he wasn't playing in Korea then, right? And they were just farming. Like they could go to Korea, have farmed everything before that in NA, and then go to Korea and bomb out in group stages. To be fair, to now
a very hard group, yes,
a very hard group. Also that we now know was very hard because Mighty AOD.
Exactly.
A shitload of players that are now in Overwatch League, right? So I think also in general, the Overwatch League season, even if you want to weight that and still aggregate, I don't think Soon had a bad season. I think he was one of the best Western performers, certainly, in terms of DPS at least. I think he's a fine choice, though the problem, of course, is that it doesn't, like when we're talking about GOATs in other regions like sports and specifically like American sports or whatever, there's of course way longer periods to consider.
Sure.
But the weightings between these periods are also much more homogeneous. While in Overwatch, it's like, okay, so how much do you value Apex? How much do you value now the Overwatch League towards that? And depending,
let's have that discussion then. What would your answer be if someone asked you that question? Like, for example, okay, obviously, part of the issue here is someone who didn't watch Apex might think, for example, oh, maybe, you know, the scene wasn't as professional or there wasn't as much money or infrastructure or whatever. So, like, as a pure competition, how do you weigh Apex against Overwatch? Because I'll say myself, I'll reveal my bias entirely, is I actually don't think Overwatch is like superseded Apex entirely. Like, for me, the Apex seasons collectively quite similar to the Overwatch League to me. As long as I view the stages and I view the stage playoffs as like a mini little tournament, basically, I think they're fairly comparable. You know, obviously it's a tournament versus a league. There's a little bit of wiggle room there. But for example, if we're going to talk again about other sports, I have to say in most other sports, the reason why this discussion actually even in traditional sports isn't that great is because too many people put all the emphasis on winning the championship. So for example, famously, if you're the guy who like has a godlike regular season career, but you don't win the championship very often, they'll sometimes rank you below the guy who actually was kind of like hit and miss in the regular season, but he was on a great team and won a lot of championships. So it is worth like putting those cards in. So where would you come down on that one? How important was Apex for you as somebody who did watch the league?
I personally think that, okay, I'm not mad at you if you say it only started in season 2 to be really competitive, but I think you could make the argument that season 1 of Apex was the quantum leap in terms of professionalization, and the games looked way different back before Apex than they do now in comparison to Overwatch League now. So I think the professionalization, also the influx of Korean coaching, certainly helped a bunch there. I think, like, to me, of course, the level of play as games progress, of course, gets higher. But then again, the quantum leap we saw in Apex Season 1, and I would say that for that reason, when I do aggregates, I always weight Apex pretty highly, also in comparison to Overwatch League. Certainly not higher, because that's the end stage so far that we've seen.
Sure.
and also international competition and everything. So, but yeah, in general, I definitely rate all those 4 seasons.
What about you, Volamel? It's worth just saying at the beginning, just for people who want to know.
Sure, yeah. I think most of the Apex seasons should be weighted fairly highly. To Yiska's point, I do think that, you know, there are some people who look at, you know, season 2 as kind of like the pinnacle, but I think what they're trying to say when they say that is that it was the pinnacle of Korean Overwatch. That's when we started to see, you know, late 2016. That's when we really started to see Lunatic High come into their own. We saw LW Blue take IEM Gyeonggi. Like, that's when Korean Overwatch really took its step forward and kind of surpassed the West in a way. Because if you remember, like, even some of the older interviews with Rogue, they would talk about how, like, they're rolling and again, scrim bucks, whatever. But, you know, they were very, very confident, very successful in running this Beyblade meta, and that big switch and kind of this reset of the practice environment really helped Korea, and it just kind of lit the spark under them, and they kind of started. You started to see Korean teams consistently just outpace everybody, and I think generally when people say, like, oh, Apex Season 2 was like pinnacle, like the golden era, I think what they're trying to say is like the golden era of Korean Overwatch, because like the West has been kind of churning out events for a good year before Korea started. So
it's funny that you say, Yiska, that there was people basically like downplaying Soon before he was in LA Valiant, because what's bizarre about that is, like, he's been very good in the LA Valiant, but I thought he was better when he was on like Misfits and Rogue. He actually looked like his individual level was much higher, and in fact the thing I find bizarre about that angle is, if you went back to that period of time when he was in Rogue, people would have told you, no, the whole team's amazing, you know, they've all got all these great players. This is where people have seemed very inconsistent to me. Is like, but you guys, because we're talking mainly about like Reddit people, you guys hate everyone in that team who isn't him. Like, about the only other person you even acknowledge is decent is Uncle, because he came along with the Overwatch League now. Everyone gives no credit to Wins. They all think he was arrogant and overrated. I don't hear anyone going on about like fucking Nico, who was another member of the team. AKM obviously got mad memed on when he was on the Fuel. If you don't consider AKM a really skilled player, you must think Soon's a fucking god, because by your logic, he must have hard carried that team. Like, you can't, it has to be one or the other. You have to think the team was really good, or Soon must have been really fucking insanely good. Like, for me, he was like the hard carry of that team.
No, yeah, I think it kind of played into the way that you could play Tracer at the time. Like, if I had to guess, well, maybe not guess, like, you know, feeling argument. If I had to mark like where I thought like Soon's kind of peak was, it was during a couple months after the 3-way trade between like Luminosity, Rogue, and I think it was Misfits. You know, starting from like Overwatch Open and into like Rogue's return to North America. I think that was like peak Soon. Like, super dominant, had some flexibility to him, and still was able to play Tracer the way he wanted to. It was just like this very flank heavy, you know, dominant, aggressive play style that was pretty standard at the time. You know, you saw people like Bunny play the very similar kind of way.
Because, you know, when people say, like, this is another example again of where people are, it feels like we've been watching the game for 10 years. We're only talking about like 2 years ago now. Yeah. You remember the old argument that everyone tried to make as they were doing what I alluded to, like clinging on to the idea the Western teams would still be the best. The moment you knew that Apex was competitive enough that now people realized Koreans were better was where they didn't even go with the angle of like, oh, well, this like Western team would have beaten you if they'd been at Apex. They just like moved back to the sort of Morton Bailey angle of like, oh no, well, it's just Western DPSs are better than Korean DPS. Yeah, okay, we'll give you Koreans. You can have all the team play and all the support players, but the DPS players, you'll never be better than the Westerners. And when they said that, by the way, who do you think they were talking about? They weren't talking about fucking Seagull. They were talking about Tivik and Soon. These are the Show4 maybe when he's on Cloud9. These are the names they were thinking of. You know, so Soon was one of them, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if you took somebody like Moon, I guess it's a little bit harder because he'd be a little bit biased. But if you took like a Korean coach that played and had to practice against Soon or had to prepare against him, I genuinely think like back during the Apex era and you interviewed them now, they'd say that he was probably one of the top tracers in the world at the time, like within top 3 of it. I don't think anybody would argue that.
Yeah, it's the problem, I guess, is that we're having and. Like saying Soon and bring him up as a GOAT, doesn't it feel a little bit underwhelming in terms of what kind of...
Here's the reason why, Yiska. I think I know where you're going on this one, because I have the exact same problem, right, in CSGO at the moment. Because the problem we have in CSGO is that basically the same scenario has occurred. There's a player called Device, right? And the thing about him is his longevity is amazing because he's someone who's actually only in his prime now. He's like 21 or 22 now, and he was already one of the best players in the world, and he was like 19, 18. So the problem is, if you want to just go by who had the most years where they were a top 5 player in the world, he wins. He's probably the best, especially because it's for the past 3 or 4 years in a row. But the problem with this, Yiska, is if I'm being honest, I'd maybe struggle to find more than like a 3-month period where he was actually the best player. So it's like he's winning by default in a way because he on aggregate, but that in a way, I know what you mean. It's like on the one hand, I have to give you credit because you were good for a long time. That should get something. But at the same time, how could you be the best ever if you were actually never the best? You see the part that I do struggle with that myself as well. I'm not sure where I come down on that one. I think for that one, the only way I can think to resolve it is kind of like what we're saying with Soon. It's like, we probably wouldn't vote Soon the GOAT, but you have to put him in the conversation because the circumstances mean you have to. But in a way, you're doing it as though like, right, we have to mention this guy, but we're not going to vote for him because the odds are we're going to vote. Like, I'll just go ahead and give everyone a spoiler. We're probably going to vote for someone who was the best at one point. It's going to be Ryo Ji-hong or fucking Jonak or something like that. It's probably going to be that. Was that kind of the angle you were going with there, though, Yiska? Because I have a tough time with that one as well myself.
Yeah, that's the problem. Like all the people that you could otherwise name took a massive nosedive in Overwatch League. That is the problem, really. There are a lot of names that you could legitimately bring up. So, for instance, someone like Taimu, right? I think legitimately, in comparison to other Western players, I don't think anyone in the West ever peaked as high as Taimu did in his peak.
We're talking about like 2016 or something now, though, right? Pretty early.
2017, I think it was. No, 2016, yeah. It must have been Epic Season 1, yeah. So that was, I think, in October. So,
I mean, this is basically when people started to fall back to the argument I was talking about before, right? The idea was like, okay, we'll give you that maybe these Korean teams are better, but no one's better than Taimu. No one's better than Tvik. That was the old angle.
Yes. And like the way he was imposing on multiple picks, he was, I mean, to this day, if you now watch Taimu clips from 2016, he was doing pine shit.
They still look pretty good now, mate. Some of those Widowmaker clips still look pretty legit.
It's pretty nuts. And then also his proficiency on Roadhog, also his clutch factor coming up in big games and like having nuts stats, and also just like from the eye test, just hard carrying at the time. Like that is a legitimate argument. The problem is, of course, Dallas Fuel didn't do well, and who did worse? Taimu this season. Yes. So that like it's very hard to make these arguments then, right?
For anyone who doesn't know, by the way, like I'll go ahead and say it myself, just from my own personal experience. Actually, Taimu is the person who shocked me the most when the Dallas Fuel was bad. Because I could have believed the team would be bad. Like, it was a team that already, if you knew any of the, like, rumors about, like, what they were like as people and the relationship, you could have totally already seen how certain relationships wouldn't work. Or when you, like, brought a player into a team where before the players decided the players, you could see how that might not work. But when I saw their team and I saw how good Effect was, even when Overwatch League started, I was like, right, well, the two things you should be able to rely upon is like Effect and Taimu are going to carry no matter what. And then it's like, if the others don't get their shit together, right, we'll see. But so when Taimu himself was terrible and then even lost confidence in himself, that was very shocking because he looked actually, like you're alluding to here, like skill wise, you would have thought in your brain, you think mechanical skill should be the last thing to go. Like that should never have a problem, right? You should, just like Effect, you should be primed to still somewhat carry, still look good. So it was actually shocking how bad he looked for those first like 3 stages pretty much.
It also, like, just across his career, for instance, he was early on in 2016, he was kicked from IDDQT for a while, then, like, basically made his own team, but bounced back. Then he had a little bit of a dip, would always bounce back. Like, he was a bounce back character, which is still why I still think maybe somewhere that the old Taimu is in there, but he hasn't shown it for the longest time now. And that was completely unpredictable for me before the Overwatch League started. And I wonder if it's something about the environment or things that happened. But I still think if he can lose that knot, like the skills he had in 2016 are sufficient for Overwatch League now. So it's a bit of a riddle where you see not seeing, the success that he had.
Volamel, should we just go ahead and make this the official section where we just talk about Ryu Ji-hong, so we can just get out of the way very quickly because we all know what's going to happen. First 15 minutes is going to be like, you know, basically reminding everyone who he is, because now obviously they don't know if the Overwatch League. Like I always tell people, that's one of the most depressing things about the Overwatch League is if I'd have given you like top 10 storylines going in, the amount of them that you would have never got, like you've never seen Ryu Ji-hong play. I'm sorry if you only watch the Overwatch League. Like you think you have, but you haven't seen him at all. So let's get that out of the way first then. So when would you say the peak was of Ryu Ji-hong, and why would he be a candidate for this status of best player of all time? Because actually, I'm going to go ahead and guess for a lot of people, this is the first name that
that's the first
discussion. It's almost a cliche.
And to be fair to them, I do think that you can kind of like spin the measurement or the lens that you're using to kind of measure who you believe is the GOAT. Is it a time period? Is it, you know, the aggregate like you guys are mentioning? I think you can have those discussions. Is it by year? Is it by region?
Sure.
You know, I think those are all very valid. And for his time, I do think one thing that I haven't noticed is nobody ever brings up how he kind of influenced the game. If you go back and you watch how Genji specifically played during like Apex Season 1 and early Apex Season 2, basically during his peak, they were super aggro. Like I remember watching Tavik and even Nico just like perma-dashing, doing a 180, fan, try to get the reset, continue, just super aggro. And nobody would really respect honest sleep dart. And that's basically where Ryu Ji-hong got his kind of like name and got his start. He was pretty aggressive in general. Like he would go for more damage over kind of healing. Somebody like Chips was kind of his antithesis in a way. And he would punish people for playing this really aggressive style of Genji and sleep dart you. And he kind of affected, in a microcosm, he affected the game in a way that like Jonak did as well, right? He kind of changed. He was a paradigm shifter. I don't think anybody kind of like has encapsulated that as you know. Nobody's really kind of brought that up. We just kind of say like, oh, he was really good. He slept our people. That was really cool. But the reason why he was so kind of oppressive or game changing is because he forced Genjis to play a different way.
Yeah. No, the Ryu Ji-hong thing. The problem for me in this debate is, it's not that he only dropped off in Overwatch League. Yeah. He was already pretty bad in Apex Season 4. That's the problem.
Even Season 3, when he was forced to move to Zen, the team generally, on average, took a dip. Like if you go back and watch Apex Season 3, they almost lost literally to control maps. Like that was the Kongdu Lunatakai match where Kongdu would draw every map, take it to control, and then win control. And it was kind of like we were all sat there like, wow, they're just going to draw the last map, take it to control, and then you know, Game 7 is control, so they'll win control. And it ended up happening that it wasn't the case, but you know, putting him on Zen, he has never looked comfortable, like ever. It's never been good. I've always been of the kind of school of thought, the same way that kind of Elk has thought about the game, where it's like, if you are this kind of transcendental like player on this hero, you can kind of force your style. It might not be the optimal way to play, but you should be able to at least get something done. Like you kind of surpass what is optimal, right?
And the logic in games like MOBA games, for example, where obviously again picks is like a very big deal, but obviously in those games you can also be banned, etc. Is like there are, if you are a world class enough player, sometimes obviously you will pick something that is actually itself innately not that strong in the meta, but the idea is it's strong for you because like your skill set is so ridiculous. You know, you can still do something, or you can be a counter to whatever the prevailing reason as to why that doesn't work is.
Yep. And you know, I do kind of have to eat a little bit of crow because I was of the opinion, you know, a lot of people were, that Seoul Dynasty were going to come in and they looked really good during Seoul Cup, for instance. You know, was playing against some of the teams there, and it seemed to be kind of a revival of the team. You know, they got a star DPS player in, they've kind of revitalized. Maybe they'll do really well. You know, looking back, we could have maybe predicted them not to be as good as what they were, but I think we were all just kind of, you know, excited, a little bit emotionally charged. You know, we take such a legendary team when we throw them against some of the best players in the world. They should, of course, make it. And if you do look at the trends and you look at his Zenyatta, the way that Miro played specifically, he was very comfortable with playing with Jae-Hong on Ana. Is he comfortable just having a pocket Zen orb? And no, it doesn't. It never looked as cohesive as it once was, because it forced Miro to change his style, and Jaehong had to learn how to play Zen, and it never really worked out. Would they have been outpaced? But yeah,
this is also exactly how I actually would like it when people describe players as well, because you notice the player is constantly being described in the context of his team, the roles within the team balance of, you know, who has what resources, the meta of what you're playing within the team, within those roles. Because, like, for example, when this just shows how it's so like dangerous to take narratives and then think that the narrative is like a fact, as opposed to, you know, this is my current conclusion on this information. Because I've noticed almost everyone has now gone from like so what happened was Ryu Jaehong was just the god. He was the greatest player ever. As we were talking about, like, the comparisons are pretty good ones. Like in League of Legends, Mad Life played a support position, but was like a carry player. You know, you got all these great transcendent examples you can give. The problem is, when he then, as you're saying, by the time Overwatch League begins, they've already dropped off entirely. Now everyone looks back, and first of all, this is how you know it's a totally different perspective, because almost everyone now is sort of like, maybe Esker was a lot better than I thought, actually. You know, because everyone will remember, simultaneous to saying Ryu Jaehong was good, was we used to put it in the context of like, plus he's carrying shitters like Esker to the final, like, he must be a god. That used to be a reason he was even better, remember? Whereas now, you look at it and you go, actually, maybe I underrated that guy. Well, similarly, the angle I don't think anyone notices is the one that you've just brought up now, Volamel. So when the Overwatch League was beginning, everyone would have told you Toby is a fucking god. This guy's like the best Winston in the fucking world or something. Well, it turns out he played very differently depending on what other people on his team were doing. You know, that's why it's tough to piece, first of all, like a legit narrative, but then you also have to kind of remember which threads you put in there so you can unravel them again.
And I mean, we can talk about like how Miro was kind of transcendental, and at a time, again, he was kind of the one. I would say, I can't think of anybody.
Did I say Toby there? I meant to mention.
Yeah, I knew what I meant.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we can talk about him kind of being the first big paradigm shifter when it came to Winston, because if we kind of go back and we remember,
basically we wouldn't have like Fisher without Miro, right?
Yeah, I think he kind of paved the way for that specific style. I think if we didn't have Miro and Fisher came in, I think Miro's legacy would be kind of attributed to Fisher in that way. I think that's just kind of how he is. I think as a person, like he just plays that. Yeah, I would say that Miro probably is like one of the first like big paradigm shifters shaping the way that you could play Winston specifically. But if we go back and we look at like old Lunatic High with like Dean and like Lee Chae-jun on the roster, back like APAC 2016, it was during this meta where D.Va wasn't as good. D.Va was still like, you had to use all of your defense matrix. She had all this health. She wasn't great. You still saw her use some at times, but it wasn't like this big D.Va gold rush that people are kind of like very comfortable with remembering right now. And you would see Miro kind of flex between playing Winston as an off tank on maps like Nimbani, and he would also play Zarya, right? But when he would play Winston, it was this very aggressive, kind of like almost how you would play Hammond as a flex tank, you know, just kind of rolling around, being annoying, just threatening a dive in the back line. You really wouldn't tend to see that too often. We saw those styles clash with like Rogue and like Lunatic High back in like APAC is a great example. And then as the meta shifted, as you know, the weird stuff with Lunatic High happened, he kind of fell into this main tank role. It just so happened that his style fit with this dive meta, this triple DPS kind of started the dive meta, as people kind of fondly forget. And it worked out for him, but he's never really been all that successful off of it. Because again, he fell into it. He fell into this main tank role. He fell into this style of play that he only really knew how to play Winston this way, and it worked because Jaehong could play Ana. They figured out a way how to play it there. You know, he leaps up. He still gets the slam damage. Jaehong has a chance to heal him up real quick. Can play super aggressive. I don't know. It's sad to see him go, but I think that you could say Miro at some point was at Jaehong's level in terms of like big paradigm shifts, you know, changing how the game's played.
Yeah, the problem is really like he was probably still, I would say, the worst player in Apex Season 3, despite winning on the Lunatic High roster. Yeah, I would even put Guido ahead of him, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. He was dropping off pretty hard, and I also think, like, for me, innovation is just not as big of a factor when talking about GOATs. It's just like, yeah, you got that style and you showed everyone, but GOAT factor is, okay, have you mastered that specific style? And then he was also honestly pretty underwhelming on his style as it developed further, because he, like, even on Winston, he was nowhere near the top performers later on. So
no. And again, it's more of the kind of changing of the metrics of how you measure GOATs. Like at this specific time, I think you could say that Miro was in competition for like the GOAT of this era. Do I think that he kind of fits the bill like over Jaehong? No, I don't think so. But I think that you are going to hear people say that, like, oh, what about Miro? What about Miro? And I think that, like, I wouldn't like publicly shame those people. And I kind of like will tease the idea and think about it. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't hate it, basically. If we're talking about a specific brick in time, not entirety of the game, like an aggregate, like we started off.
Right, being as there's obviously some people that came up in the Overwatch League that we can talk about. Sure. I thought a fun one to talk about is the guy I just referenced, is Fisher, because obviously he was around before. Right? People will remember Ron Kongdu Panthera. He's the guy who was in Apex. But I have to say, as much as he was like a sensation on Gladiators for those 2 stages in the Overwatch League and looked like, you know, a complete game changer, I can understand why people had him as an MVP candidate. For me, he never popped in the same way when he was on Kongdu Panthera. Like, he wasn't the guy I was always watching. So how would you contrast this guy's whole career? Is he in this category? Should he be considered a candidate?
I don't.
He's somebody who can span both games.
I don't think so personally. I think that the kind of Cloud9, Kongdu Panthera era of the game, or specifically for that team, I always viewed them through the lens of like their DPS, so Birdring and Rascal. And yeah, they were very cohesive and they played super aggressively, which again, maybe is attributed to Fissure, or we can attribute to Fissure now, you know, looking back. But it wasn't the same level of dominance. It wasn't the same level of like carry, you know, performance. It wasn't the same level of primal rages. Yeah. And I mean, again, it was early in his career. Will he continue to grow? Hard to say, but no, I don't think so. Not as much as some other main tanks. Like, for instance, like Gesture. Like, he comes in, blows everybody's minds, and continues.
Well, to me, it might. I have to be aware of this bias that we might have, that we just didn't pay as much attention to tanks unless they did something revolutionary.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
So, to me, I think KDP, especially Fissure and Void, were names that I also remembered the casters always say, okay, these are some of the best front lines in the world.
Sure, yeah, I mean, you could say that, but like, are they GOATs though?
Yeah. I mean, that's the problem, but maybe that's just because with our perception of what tanks did, maybe we weren't as aware at the time.
See, that's where I'll fight you on, because if you remember, like back during Apex Season 3, Apex Season 2, well, actually, I don't know if Mono was on the team, but Mono came in. It was kind of the first main tank that we kind of looked at as, yeah, maybe like this guy's actually doing a lot for. You could see it in the statistics, you could see it in the play. That was kind of the first like main tank post Miro, I felt like, that was really like, wow, you really see him participating a lot in kills. Like he is aggressive in a way, but it kind of fits the style. You know, you have Arhan following him up. So I kind of agree, but I also kind of am like, oh, okay, well, I remember talking about Mono in the same sense. So like, I feel like we were still kind of looking at main tanks in some kind of, you know, qualitative sense.
Yeah. The problem with Mono is he was in such an abysmally bad part of the bracket where it's like,
sure, yes, they did get some easy brackets. I will say.
The first time they were tested, that style didn't work anymore. So
that's fair. That's fair.
I wonder how much of an impact that had. But certainly his sitting on the flank style, not taking a lot of damage, trying to sneak. Also, I mean, you could say these were like the infancies of what later on Gesture and Prophet just perfected in terms of synergy between, even though I think it was more like he's sitting on the flank and waiting for Arhan to do something reckless so he can,
and then you just babysit him.
It's almost like Chinese Overwatch.
Yes, it is. Arhan is like a Korean Chinese player, 100%. Very much so.
Would also make sense is obviously Monty just like irrationally hated him from day one. So that would also just thematically fit with all the appropriate aspects there. The thing is, though, you're so right, though, Yiska. Like, to be fair, tank was the least discussed position because at least like they had the Ryu Ji-hongs of the world who would get some props for being a support, you know. But like I will say that's one of the reasons why I have a hard time remembering Fisher when I was on some of these teams because I remember in my brain LW and Kongdu teams, the Panthera and Blue teams were just like, these are the super DPS players that never win because mechanical skill alone doesn't win in Overwatch. Like, it's a team game and has, you know, it's much as it's an FPS game, actually never really was dominated by that aspect. So I always just remember those teams are the ones where it's like, you'd get excited every time and then they always let you down somehow.
Yeah. Especially like the Winston stuff that, like, we didn't even know about the tech that we know about now. Yeah. Like the double fist hit, for instance, like that makes Primal just such a lethal ultimate where it's almost getting Genji blade type kill numbers now, right? But yeah, it's so weird because if Monty didn't scream Kaiser into like looking like a good main tank player, basically with that one shatter, then yeah, we didn't have many exciting tank plays. And a lot of it, let's be honest, on that Rhine play was also how how Runaway played around this, how Huxel baited Janus and whatever, right? So there was much less room explored for tank players to make a difference, or we were just not aware of the micro aspects that tanks were doing. That is also very possible.
Like, if we look back now, sorry, do you have a point there?
No, I would generally agree that I think players on average have continued to get better, and like again, like you mentioned, there is text being discovered, like little maneuvers that you can do to kind of maximize your damage output. And yeah, I would agree that we weren't always looking at the most the best way to view the game. We weren't looking at, specifically the main tanks. We would kind of just get caught up with the DPS. So yeah, generally I would agree.
Right. When I ask about this next player, so I'm going to talk about Gesture. So obviously this is someone who won Overwatch League Season 1, won Stage 1 of the Overwatch League Season 1, was on a very good team that won Apex. The credentials are all there. The problem is I feel like he should be someone who should be considered for this conversation, but I'm saying that knowing that it's even worse than the Fisher example, because when I think back to the GC Busan team, like this is a team where perspective changes everything on this lineup. For example, what's mad is, like, think back to the days when they added the GC Busan and Kongdu Panthera teams to Cloud9, and the whole thing was like, wow, which lineup will they make, or will they combine them? You look back now, it's like, it's no wonder half the fucking GC Busan players are gone. Like, those players were terrible in the Overwatch League. It was like, basically, it was like Prophet, maybe occasionally Hureg, and then obviously Gesture was very good. Like, Prophet and Gesture, very legit. Some of the others, it's like, I feel like they start to get bad pretty quick when you start going down that lineup. Like, those are a lot of the players that got rejected from the London Spitfire, basically. So, at the time, initially, just give me what did you think of Gesture at the time he was in Apex when GC Busan came along? And then how do you kind of see it with perspective?
This is one of those things that like still has me scratching my head, because this was a team, and at the time I was like actually pretty invested in watching like the amateur division, like Apex Challengers. Like I would try to like watch as much as I can and like maybe put out like a scouting report for like the newer teams that are coming into Apex. And I remember watching GC Busan. I'm like, yeah, they're all right. Like they're nothing to like shake a stick at. And that was kind of the general consensus. We remember this now, in the finals, Wolf talking about it as this one of the most forgettable teams coming into the season. And then something just kind of clicked. And I still to this day don't know exactly what that was. Was it this, the duo style that kind of Yiska penned? Was it, a meta shift that we weren't necessarily too, accurate with? At the time when he started to break into Apex, they were fine. Like they were nothing to really brag about. And then once I think their match before the playoffs, that's when things just looked different. Like Gesture and Prophet were just on point. And I don't want this to be like reductionist or like, to kind of rewrite history, but Wujal was really good.
Yeah.
the change in Diva and the way the defense matrix works seemed to absolutely just ruin his style, and he's never really recovered from that. But like at the time, he was considered to be like one of those, like, I wouldn't say transcendental, because like he absolutely fell off and it wasn't for a long period of time. But like he was, I would put him as like pretty close to being third on that list of like top players within his team.
Yeah. The thing I remember though about that situation was, especially for instance, others that in the flex tank role that would be in, it talks about that, like Zumba. Like Zumba's job was so much harder, like trying to keep, I remember watching the Lunatic High series against GC Busan back, like both of those series. And it's basically every time, like GC Busan sees that Miro is out of position, so they poke on him to some degree. He doesn't have jump, so what Zumba has to do is use boosters and like matrix him. And it's like, okay, let's just kill Jaeon. Let's just kill him, right? And that to be in that situation where your main tech actually knows where to position, so he's not exposed to these switches, was probably much easier for him to play that situation. Also, I think legitimately, at some point, I think Prophet and Gesture, and it's almost at this. I don't think you can separate these two players at this point when you're talking about the GOAT situation, because not only I personally think Prophet has a stronger claim to that title than Gesture did, because while Gesture certainly was always a very good tank that also had fragility, he was an absolute hyper carry in these situations where everything's on the line. Like that Apex Season 4 finals, never in the history of Overwatch has anyone ever dumpstered a team as hard and have as kill differential. He had like 30% more kills than the guy on the other team in the same role. That was nuts, right? And then also now coming into these playoffs, like there is something to be said about a GOAT's quality to be clutch in the heaviest moments.
Realistically, Prophet was one of the main reasons why, even up to the very end, and we're talking like stage 4, where still London Spitfire hadn't really got this shit together, everyone still was always on the position of, but if it was all to come together, the ceiling is so great. And Prophet's a massive part of the reason why, right? Because the idea is, if this guy heats up, he could just be the hottest player in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a guy who literally played an entire season without showing a Genji and then broke it out in the finals. Like I remember sitting in Discord, with Yiska and Sideshow and like all of our kind of friends and Sideshow. If Prophet actually plays Genji, I'm gonna like scream.
That is some like anime level shit, or like the Karate Kid, where you learn like the one move, but obviously you don't just use it immediately. You have to save it for the main villain or some shit, don't you? Like,
and it absolutely carries the team and puts Hureg on a role that like he is not good. Like if you go back and watch his tracer, it's literally like you're trying to throw, you're trying to force your team to lose, and Prophet just like wills a victory in like 3 maps. I think it started on Eichenwald. At least that's when I remembered it. And he just pulls this out and just dumpsters Haxal, who broke out in Apex Season 1 as like this god tier Genji, who people would actually pick Zenyatta when it was bad to shut him specifically down. Like that's like mind blowing.
No, he did it against one of these. Like, Who Are You and Haxal have historically been always like the twin Genjis that you just can't get past. There are some guys that tried, but over the history of Overwatch, I would almost argue, like those levels were not reached, right? Like Who Are You invented or not even invented. It's not like he just did it because he was audacious enough to succeed in it, which was playing Genji against Pharah and just completely dumpstering teams, right? Like double killing basically the Far Mercy in the air. So for Prophet to come in and do it against Haxal as well, that was absolutely insane for me to see. I remember I was on my way out. I watched that final. Yeah. I was like going to work, and the stats get uploaded, and I look at it on my phone, and I'm like, oh damn, those stats are not correct.
I'm just looking at it now, mate. In over the series, over the best of 3, where it was the Busan Runaway Apex final, Prophet had 134 kills, which is like almost like, I think the nearest amount was on his own team. Gesture had 90, and on the other team someone had 85. Stitch, like almost like closing in on double the other team's best player.
And I legitimately went, okay, because I already knew Baroy at the time, who was uploading these stats, and I'm like, okay, there's some bug in the reader. Are you sure? That like I'm okay. I'm double checking. Yeah, still 134 kills. Yeah. It's like, this is unbelievable. Nobody has ever done this in the history of Overwatch, and that's why. Also, that's a question mark towards GOAT character, but I think legitimately Profit and Gesture have the best prospect to feel like a GOAT that we would see from professional sports, because like they are still pristine in my mind. Mm-hmm. To me, these two also didn't have these big drop-offs that their team would have you think they had. They were consistently doing pretty well. Also, teams were running hard counter strats against them, where just by doing so, if there was someone behind that, they would be able to exploit that space. That wasn't the case for the most part because Birdring was dropping off. That, like, to me, they were playing fairly well throughout the entire mid-season, playing, of course, very good in stage 1, and then, of course, bringing it in playoffs. Like, in my mind, also, this is basically something they have to ask themselves is too. That's a question. We haven't seen someone dominate over, what is it now, a year, right? Like, when did they play Apex season? Yeah, it must almost be 2 years, right? Like, it will be 2 years in...
The season that they won of Apex was like October 2017.
Okay. Yeah. So that would be an unprecedented time of
2 years
domination. So, like, if they can do it this season, if they are not, and that is also at GOAT quality, to not be like satisfied with just winning the first Overwatch League. No, you want to be the greatest of all time. Literally, this is the second season. It's back to work. You're trying it again. Like, you can't just ride out your contract that was re-up probably because of this, right? So this is where the GOAT quality comes in. It will be very interesting to see if they maintain that level.
To add to that, like, I'm kind of the belief that season 2 of the Overwatch League has massively leveled up in terms of just the general skill. So if they are able to run it back and just look completely dominant, like just heads and shoulders above everybody else, like, yeah, I think at that point across the 3 or 4 years, however far back you want to go for Overwatch and say it's been competitive, like, I don't know if 2015 really counts, but you know how this is like the pinnacle, like, hardest competition, doesn't matter, like, most characters, most teams, most players, you know, best format, whatever you want to call it. I think that they would be the GOATs, just period, end of the story, like them combined in a way. Or if you had to really pick it and not be, you know, a cop out, then it'd probably be Profit if they can do it in season 2.
I got you there.
Can't argue can't argue with that, man.
Well, also the other good thing as well is, to be fair, this is also where perspective is very important, is if you go to the beginning of the Overwatch League season, everyone would be trying to gaslight the fuck out of you, including a certain friend of mine, that it's actually a DPS duo. I think you'll find there, Thorin. It's actually Profit and Birdring. It's very important that you mention Birdring a lot, whereas, like, I think everyone knows who watched one of the last episodes. Like, that is a sacred cow I will absolutely destroy in my slaughterhouse of analysis. Don't worry about that one, folks. Like, don't make that your religious icon. I will absolutely butcher and gore fucking Birdring anytime on this show. So, okay, what about this then? So, right, those are the main names, the ones that we put forwards. But so now a lot of the ones we pick out, I will admit, are going to be more along the lines of like, well, you could make a case for this person, or maybe they deserve to be mentioned, you know. And it's worth putting that category in, because I don't want people to think there really are like 10 people and it's like equally distributed. Mostly people would pick just the people we've mentioned before. Like, if I had to guess, I think most people in history would just pick like Ryu Jihong or fucking Profit. I think those would be the two most obvious names. Like, if we add in some more names, right, we can do a lot of the Overwatch League ones in a minute. So we'll add in some of the ones you'd expect there, Carpe, etc. We can chuck in some of those ones. But I thought to still have some of the Apex flavour, someone I thought that would be an interesting one to mention, because, again, along the lines of the angle I gave with, like, Device and Soon, of, like, he was never really the best player, so it doesn't count in that sense. But if you want to add people who had success in Apex and success in the Overwatch League and had pretty good impact on the game, Libero has got to be up there.
Yeah. Somebody that I've been very, very, enthralled by, I guess you could say. Super flexible. I think people really slept on it. To be fair, I don't think even I knew that he could like flex as hard as he did, specifically on Widow. Like,
yes,
at least taking pace with Carpe. Like, Carpe is an absolutely phenomenal Widow, and being able to take duels and actually have like a decent win rate against him, like that's pretty crazy. You like just thinking about like how he started as like,
and you're in a team with fucking Pine and Sabiobi, and you go, listen here, I'll handle the fucking Widowmaker. You're like, wait a minute, aren't you the projectile DPS bit? Shut the fuck up. Like, I'll be taking that.
and what people don't realize is that he started as a diva. He started like running diva stats like from Apex Season 2 and like early into Apex Season 3. He was the leader in like diva, like just across the board on Winston's Lab, like period, bar none. Nobody else came close. Then he transitioned. Meta kind of had their rumblings. Hoon wasn't able to play Zarya full time. It forced Saya into playing other heroes. Like, they absolutely fell apart. So people like, we never really got to like celebrate Libero as much as I would have liked. But yeah, I do think like, in the terms of what you're mentioning with like the aggregate, like to me, and what I value, super flexibility, being able to be meta-proof. Yeah, I think Libero is what I wish Fletic could have been.
Because like, I'll give you my context for this, like I'll add in, which is that what people are forgetting is like it's funny, when NYXL first came into the Overwatch League, a lot of people thought like Libero was going to mainly be on the bench and that he would just be rotated in for flex purposes. Like, he can play this one thing we need for this comp or against this opponent. And first of all, like I'm mentioning, in what I think is the most ridiculous talent-packed roster ever, he literally won a starting spot over people who actually were more famous for some of the fucking characters he plays now over them in their team. And so some of those people, he basically took their job. Then you add in, like, once you get past the first stage of the Overwatch League, he was absolutely one of the best NYXL players. Like, he was, for me, he was like one of the killer elements because they already had a sick Tracer. So when Tracer's available, yes, Sable B is going to be great. Like, they already have Jonak. They already have, as you said, like, a whole bunch of Mano, etc. But at this point in time, there was definitely periods of, like, one of the things I thought was crazy about their team was it was because they had such an abundance of wealth. Like, that's why the meta couldn't really fuck with them. Because even if it takes this guy's power away, the other person's going to be stronger. So I think actually he probably was a sleeper in the Overwatch League in that sense. Like, people only added him as a good player. He was never even contender for best player. But I think he probably should have been if you look at the whole Overwatch League, all four stages rather.
Yeah. I think the problem is also now that we can sort of evaluate Meta Athena back in the day, my God, like that team must have trash coaching. Or it's not even trash coaching. It's probably someone from a jazz group or something and goes like, so I have some of the best hardware that we later on will find out, like some of the best players that play the game now, even deep into Overwatch League. Like, let's shoot some jazz hands and boost over these walls with like May. Like, what kind of garbage was that? It's basically like, okay, let's stop trying to win and entertain people instead. Like, is this shit WWE now? Like,
for people who don't know the context, basically, when Meta Athena got really good, as actually Volamel was alluding to, because Hoon just played Zarya all the time, but bizarrely, and by the way, this didn't even make sense at the time, it was quite revolutionary, he was basically like the carry of the team while being the Zarya. A lot of people just thought, right, well, they have one way to play, and they have that one player, and if you can shut down the way to play and the player, then they're shit, right? And so actually that's why a lot of the other players, even though people like Monty would give Libero some credit, actually a lot of people made out like their team wasn't that good. They made out like they were gimmicky, whereas as Yiska's alluding to now, Sire player was on that team, fucking NUS was on that team. There was a whole bunch of people, almost the whole roster, if we go back to the early Apex season, was pretty legit actually. It's just at the time, it just shows how perspective and narratives are so interesting because there's always something to them, but you can take them too far, definitely.
Yes.
I know deep down, by the way, this is where, like, this is the reason why narratives are so tempting. You're telling me deep down, Yiska doesn't secretly love the idea that now every pleb who talks about fucking London Spitfire is going to mention his theory of, like, the tank and the DPS, as if it was, like, a fact that we all agreed upon, and now history has been completely rewritten, and they don't even know they're using his idea. Like, the same thing happens to me in CSGO, Yiska. I always tell people, people, it doesn't actually matter that right today someone battles what I say in my argument.
Yeah.
Because so many people, you know, they only read themselves about history from some like article I wrote. They're basically inadvertently, it's like that thing of like the best way to take over a country is actually just like to teach the youth of the country whatever you want. That's why all totalitarian people do it actually. It's because then the idea is you don't have to actually debate the guy who disagrees with you. The next generation just grows up believing whatever you told them. So you've successfully done that. You've broken them, even though it's you know, it's just a theory. It's just a model. Like the actual game devs didn't come out like, yes, the entire game revolves around the DPS and the tank, but you have won that one. So well done.
Yeah, well played.
No, like I distinctly remember thinking when Prophet did that also in the final and they won it. I thought to me, this is what Thorin must feel about simple and device.
Of course. Yeah. Nate, there's nothing better. Because here's the problem, right? This might sound like a weird tangent, but a lot of people, right, will think, oh, well, you're just doing what everyone does. Because a lot of people try to be hipsters. Like when Volamel said there that he was watching, like, you know, like the fucking Challenger equivalent or Contenders equivalent of Apex before there was Overwatch League, right? Well, the reason why you do that, as well as for the fact it might be interesting, is you want to see if you can find that next great player. Like, fuck, I found the next guy who's good. You know, you can tell by their skill level they're going to be really good. The difference is a lot of people are doing that, but they're doing it too willy-nilly. That's their problem. So because they do like, you know, 30 players at a time, they don't really get any credit when that player then makes it, right? Whereas the difference is, because I'm so particular, I can't lie, Yiska, I do kind of like it. Like, obviously the best examples are the two you just listed there. I've got the most consistent player ever, and I've literally also, no joke, when he was 17-year-old, picked out the best player to ever play Counter-Strike. So, you know what? I don't even claim to be right all the time, mate. But you know what? That's not a bad little resume right there. I'll put that up against a lot of other people, put it that way. As opposed to, you know, like all the cocksuckers telling me like JW was going to be the best player ever or something like. All right, mate. Well, let's see who won that one then, shall we? Should we do the final accounting on that?
And it's still going on. It's almost like some tantric massage where it's just orgasmic over years.
Yeah. Well, no, the best part is, this is the sad part. On the one level, what makes it not as good is, like I alluded to, eventually people just take it as a given that they forget that you're the one who actually came up with it. So eventually they think that they thought it up. But in a way, even that's a victory, Yiska, because then it's like, right, so basically your brain just works the way I told you to make it work. Like, you wouldn't have even had this thought program in your brain, but you know, you just accepted it whole cloth.
Yep. I impregnated your brain and someone else is raising my baby now.
Literally conceptual colonialism. Okay, right? So I went a bit dark. Well, either that or, you know, you gave the Overwatch community like a blanket full of your smallpox ideas and then they just spread. Everyone who couldn't handle them died off, and now the only people left are just Yiska babies.
I mean, if you go through his Reddit history, you know, it doesn't, you know, surprise me that those people might have that.
Dude, I had this comment where someone was like, Spitfire must be so mad that they let go Fissure, the best tank in the world. And I just wrote under it, that would be gesture. Minus like 54 or some shit. Yeah. And I posted that on Twitter, like with gesture holding the Overwatch League trophy. Dude, let's be honest, I was hard.
That's actually one of the areas. That's a great example, by the way, of where narratives actually trump even real analysis. Because what's crazy is, at that point in time, because the timeline was like, yeah, Spitfire won the first stage, but because like it looked like, oh, they just won because they like, I mean, remember the narrative was like, oh, the LW Blue players choking still, ha ha ha, like because they weren't actually considered the best team. That would cause right after that is when Fissure went and then turned Gladiators from like fucking, you know, I don't know, off the top of my head, like 6th best team into like top 4 team in the league or something. Actually, most people would have made that argument, like you're saying. They would have said Fisher's better than Gesture.
Yeah,
because, you know, by contrast of what he looked like he was doing,
exactly.
Which, by the way, is always one of the problems I have. Like, if you notice, as we were picking some of these teams apart, it does get tough when it is a team like NYXL, because it's like I can't. Like, I even have a hard time myself. This might sound weird, but considering when you start analysing NYXL, you normally start with Jonaki. Like here's the impact he had on the game and what he did that no one else could do. And so every coach is game planning against him. Every team has to play differently against him. That's all true, but it's actually the same scenarios what we've currently got in CSGO. So in CSGO, right, we have a couple of players who play positions that they are like way overqualified for. So ironically, we have a player in CSGO who plays the support position, but from the support position, he's like putting up like not star player numbers, but like much better numbers than a support should get. And he's sort of like winning way more rounds than a support should. Well, the argument that I recently made was, because most people's argument goes like this, right? We all typically know who the star player is. So in most games like this, it's going to be like a DPS player. So this would be the equivalent of thinking like, right, you know, Sabriel B is one of the best players in NYXL. Pretty reasonable opinion, I think most people would have, because you can literally see him killing all the people on the screen, having a great performance. It's obvious he's one of the best players. But the problem people always have is, when they find the guy they think is the underrated guy, they almost inevitably reduce the whole thing to like, cause he's so underrated, he's the real reason that they win, because without him, they wouldn't be as good. Now, what they always ignore in doing so is, would he be as good without them? That's the part they don't do. So just as in CSGO, I made a column that was along these lines. My point was, you're right, this guy who's the support player actually might be the best support player, but you have to understand his job is actually enhanced because he also has some of the best teammates. So that's one of my problems with the NYXL angle. Like, I'd love to have seen what Jonak would have been like not on the NYXL. Like, what the fuck would, like, I'm sure he would have done a lot of the same stuff, but how would it have worked?
Yeah,
like, I'd love to have those fucking, like, it works both ways. On the one hand, I'd love to be Sabriel B and have fucking Jonak behind me, but on the other hand, I'd like to have Sabriel B if I was Jonak as well, if you know what I mean.
Well, yeah, it is a stacked roster when you look at it. And you bring up an interesting point. You know, if you copy and paste Jonak and put him in another roster, could you kind of get them to play around him the same way that NYXL did? And I don't really know. Like, if you put him on a Western team, I imagine that they might. But if you put him on like another Korean team with like a different coaching staff, I wonder if they would.
Because, you know, like, part of the problem with this example is, and Profit's the best example, is because there's been times where London looked a bit shaky and then Profit completely hard carried. That looks way better than doing just as good a job on a team that's also carrying. Like, it just in contrast, it's going to look like you did more, even though maybe you didn't. We can't know, actually. It's hard to pick apart.
Yeah.
And for
even though he only played in Overwatch League,
yes,
should Jonak be number one? I don't think it's necessarily wrong, mate. Like, I
don't think it's wrong either.
I have to say the eye test fucking kills it. Like, I can't lie. It's hard to argue against the eye test when you watch him and every other player that plays Zenyatta.
And that's where I think he'll start to flesh out more, is if you go back and you watch the playoffs, specifically like late playoffs, like I think towards when we were starting to see a lot more Junkertown. And even like when we got Nimbani as a map in the pool, he would flex off onto other heroes and still look really good. Like his Ana, for the little bit that we saw, was like at the level, or at least looked to be at around the level of his Zen. And even his Hog looked to be really, really good. Like, this kid, I think, has a lot of room to grow when he's forced to kind of remove himself from Zen. So I'm interested to see if we'll see a meta where Zen isn't necessarily as dominant as it has been, and when he is forced to play something full time, if he can be that kind of like transcendental player for another character, then I do think that, again, there's another just like great example for being the GOAT. Like, it could just be a Jonak Prophet rivalry. Like, I don't know.
Now that I think about this, like the parallels between what Ru Jaehong was and the situation right before the drop off from Ru Jaehong is with Jonak. Like, what if he can't play Ana or whatever you need? Or even worse, in terms of like how we evaluate stuff, what if it's Moira next season?
Sure,
only, and you can't really stand out? That would be terrible. But yeah, like, it's for me to say that Jonak is a GOAT right now. Yeah, I'm. The problem is there's so little data to say just that. But if you're someone that says, okay, Overwatch started with Overwatch League, in which case you're pleb, then
well, okay. I say exactly right as he just adds the caveat, like,
yeah, which is fine. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I agree with both positions. They are plebs, but it's also fine to be plebs. You know, plebs are entirely welcome here, Volamel, as long as they know their place.
Exactly. No, but then I guess you can make the argument, and then you might look forward to the next season.
Like, he is a sick player, though. He is pretty nuts.
The problem is, like, this is the reason why I actually think if you use traditional sports categories, Prophet automatically would win, because he won Apex and he won Overwatch League season and he was super sick. It's like he has a lot of factors going for him. Basically, the only thing Prophet has going against him is like, yeah, GC Busan didn't come into the fucking league until late on. They didn't play the early Apex, but that's about it. And most people who are going to listen aren't going to care that much about those ones anyway. So I would say by traditional methods, he gets it. The problem is, like I say, with the eye test, if you just watch like the whole regular season of Overwatch League, it's ridiculous.
Yeah,
how good G.O.A.T is. Like, it almost doesn't matter the opponent, the game.
If Sideshow was here, he would tell you that his stream performance should be weighted towards that, because he told me Shonik might be one of the best players.
Can't let it go. Can't let it go.
He's still wrong for that.
Yeah, of course not. If there's one thing you have to do, Volamel, is anytime one of your friends who was you actually do respect their analysis. That's why it's important. You wouldn't do it to an idiot who you didn't care about. You just ignore them. But every time they make that one flaw where they like insert their opinion without really like being logically consistent, you have to bring that up to the end of the earth. Like, they have to either completely break down and like ask you as a friend not to mention it anymore, or apologize. Those are the only solutions acceptable. Or they end up being right. Like, that's probably the most tilt-worthy thing, when like years later they turn out to be right. Like, that does get to you a bit, you know. But
you give him all the tools to burn me on Chengdu when they inevitably succeed.
See, this is all just led up to talking about China, because, you know, like, oh yeah, I'm like this edgelord, like trying to like sift through like the Korean contenders. Like, come on, why am I in China? I'm trying to like sneak out like the next. Come on now, you've foiled my plan.
Well, the funny thing is, if a Chinese player, which by the way, inevitably it should happen, if you looked at every other game with China, it is just a numbers thing. If they have enough players play, you're going to get someone who's a prodigy. So sooner or later, I have to say, whoever ends up being the first super sick Chinese player, so we have a player in League of Legends that's very famous, everyone knows, OllieJ, the AD carry. And the whole point is, this is exactly my point, is because he's Chinese, and therefore by default it was assumed he wouldn't be as good as the best Koreans. Even when he actually probably wasn't better than the best Koreans, he automatically had that status, because, again, it's like the contrast. Like, if you're coming from an area no one expects you to be... By the way, the same thing will happen with a Western player. Like,
sure.
I don't think anyone's really done it in Overwatch League, but if someone had gone to, like, the same level as a Carpe, they would have gotten probably #1 status. They would be hyped over that. So I'm kind of still waiting for that. But that's also how I know it hasn't happened yet, Volamel, because if there really is like a super legit Chinese player, I think they will get very popular. I think we'll get really popular.
I think we're starting to see that. I don't know that it'll continue into season 2 for a number of reasons, but I think we're starting to see a couple buds starting to blossom. We'll see.
Okay. So one of the names that we haven't talked specifically about then is Carpe. So, right, who wants to take this one? Who's the bigger Carpe fan between the two of you?
I don't know, actually. Is it me?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was always really, really good. Like, what people don't remember is that he was a big flex player. Like, people will remember him as being, you know, the sick Genji, but he did have some pretty nuts clips of like just tracking against, you know, Team Envious when he was playing for BK Stars. I think it was either Apex Season 2 or Apex Season 3, kind of came into this roster. Nobody had heard of him. We were interested to see him play. And there were a couple of clips on Soldier that were really good. There was a couple of clips on McCree that were very noteworthy, and then obviously the Genji being, you know, his kind of signature pick. And he's another one of these players that we haven't, you know, we could have assumed specifically for Carpe that maybe he has like a Widow, but he comes in and just pops off. Like, we saw him on FaZe, we saw him on Selfless a little bit, like, looked good, but not to the level that he had on Philadelphia Fusion. Like, it was another kind of step up for him.
Certainly. I mean, okay, so he was on BK Stars. I just looked it up in Apex Season 1 and finished.
Okay.
I think it was 2, wasn't it? 2.
Was it 2?
I want to say it was 2. I don't think it was.
Season 1 was before he came along, because that was when they were like kind of a joke. It was like Bunny and no one else. Basically.
Bunny and Bernard was the
yeah, it's true. They in Season 2, and then went over to Selfless. But like, I think he very much has this this reputation of the ultimate mercenary who just came from Korea. And it's almost like he was one of the first Koreans, by the way, coming over generally. Didn't have anyone else on the teams that were Korean in FaZe. He was pretty much carrying bodies for most of the time. And yeah, I mean, it's very hard to stand out there as a player.
By the way, how sick is it? You were saying before about the like coaching staff of Meta Athena. But like, mate, just Korea in general, like, it's ridiculous how many of the really good players were on those like bum teams that went out in the round of 16 in Apex. It's actually nuts how many of the good like DPS players were just on the worst teams, and cause you can't just win the game as DPS, you just couldn't tell. Like, I'll fully admit, I've seen the BK Stars team play. I would have never guessed Carpe would ever be like a fucking star player in the Overwatch League.
Nope.
This could be any DPS player to me.
I think which season was it where Mighty AOD popped up? Was it
2? Was it the group with Rogue and like Lunatic High? And
Yeah, was
that
it
was
3?
Was it 3?
Season
Okay.
3, yes.
Oh, yeah,
Remember,
season
Rogue
3.
wasn't there before. With,
True.
At least with the French guys.
Right.
Okay, so they have had Diem, Ursta, Thorncut, Fate,
Yeah.
Karif, and then Moon, the coach of Valiant on the roster. That is nuts roster.
Like permanently relegated team. Like they were not.
But remember, people like Hoon from Metathena never played in the Overwatch League.
Yes,
but everyone from Mighty OAD who came last place in fucking first stage of Apex, everyone from that team gets to be on all the top teams, bidding wars. Like, nothing about Overwatch League makes any sense if you fall to Apex, does it? It's like some alien world.
That's what you get for
age
getting a map from Rogue, I guess. That was an achievement back then. But yeah, I mean, I don't think Carpe... Like many people had Carpe on that level that he ended up showing. Like you could, I'm not mad at you if you say Carpe had a better season than Prophet. I think that's a legitimate.
Over the whole year, I don't think that's unreasonable.
Yeah. Also, it's I don't know.
What do you think?
I think what Carpe does is he just feels way more imposing. He's more Pine in that sense. Carpe can take over a game if he wants to, and is in the position and feels it that. Or not even that. I don't think he's that inconsistent, to be honest.
No,
Remember,
I don't
Carpe
think so.
still has to carry even when EQO isn't a lineup, even when Shadowblade has waited 7 games to use an ult, even when fucking Snillo isn't playing because actually he could only play Tracer. You know, like this is the one guy in that team you could always rely on. I felt like.
Yeah.
And then also he had to be that person. Like Philly doesn't even make it into playoffs because of having to play with Fraggy. If it isn't Carpe that gets you these wins in certain situations where his Widow just takes over games. I think wasn't he one, if not the best duelist in. No. I think it was in a specific stage, but he has also pretty good clutch factor. Sure. So like in overtime situations, he's someone with a cool head. Yeah, I mean, generally, it will be interesting to see how this career develops. I don't think, especially because that's the problem, right? It's one thing to say, okay, Jonex started in Overwatch League Season 1, so he couldn't have done it before.
Yes.
But Carpe could have. He was already in Overwatch. He was already with BK Stars. He could have remained in Korea or like dominated with Selfless or FaZe. He didn't though. And that sort of, generally probably taints the results that he had, especially this season. Of course, if you then weight Overwatch League higher, that's fine to at least have him as a prospect, I think.
Overwatch League has also killed, because this is one of the downsides, by the way, of league formats, is that, like, if you play in tournaments, like, you actually don't have to perform at all stages of a tournament. Like, for example, if your team makes it to the final and you just play one in the final, people remember that you were great in the final. Like, it's like in many ways, it's more like peaking at the right time is more important to get your hype up. Because when we were coming into the Overwatch League, I have to say, I think there are some Western players that got way overrated for certain things. Like, listen, at one point in time, like we were alluding to before about like being able to play transcend your role. Harry Hook used to be a fucking really sick player because, as everyone knows, this guy could actually flex and play fucking DPS at the same time as being a really sick support player. But that guy never arrived in the Overwatch League and did all that stuff like the stories would tell you from Apex. Like from Apex, you would think this was like the Western support god. Like, this guy would really do it, but I mean, it goes without saying the fuel generally was underwhelming. A lot of those players, I noticed, those kind of like reps quickly died away.
Yep.
It's kind of depressing, actually.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure if it's down to the meta or whatever. I think there's just something in the fabric of the Overwatch League that selects for a different type of player. And of course, then you pile on new talent. But I think like what envious players always communicated to me was they were playing together for such a long time. They just had an intuitive feeling of who does what.
Yes.
So the problem is if you take one player out of the system, nobody can tell you what's missing, and then someone needs to compensate, and that might not be the talent that this specific player has. Now we almost have a modular understanding of what we want. We want a support player that can shot call. We want a tank that can target call. Like all these systems that we've developed in the Overwatch League, and some just don't fit the mold there. And I think that's one thing about Harry Hook.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any more names we need to put forward? Oh, I'll tell you one name. Just for the sake of fairness, I should mention this name, I guess. Is it fair to put Striker in the conversation?
I think he was good. I think he has room to grow, but I can't in good faith. For the Overwatch League Season 1 specifically, no, I can't in good faith. Yeah, we saw him transition quickly, but again, he really only had like super good performances on Tracer, and I do want to see him tested outside of that. Do I think he's a GOAT? No. Do I think he's a really, really good player? Yes.
Yeah. What I will say though is I like to give another aggregate name. I think we can also think about Anko, because
yes.
he was okay. So we were talking about Ru Jae-hong being unable to sort of get it on Zen, and then he dropped off.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, or shortly before that, where Ru Jae-hong then eked out definitely chips and Anko on Anna, we still were in the conversation, okay, these are the 3 best players in the world. And then Ru Jae-hong did some crazy sleep stuff where he counted Genjis, basically, right? But when they had to switch onto Zen, Anko was there. He was way better than Ru Jae-hong on Zen. And also, to this day, I think this still holds true. And also, Anko has given me some promise in Stage 4 when he was playing with Dallas. I think that if you're looking at it as an aggregate of performances, this guy is still in the running. I don't think he will be phased out this season.
Nope. No, I mean this was the guy who would also play Mercy for the Valiant when he was still playing with them. Like he kind of would be able to do it all. He can play Ana at a very high level, like Yiska mentioned. It was kind of that trifecta of the 3 of them would kind of, there were different styles, play for different teams, had to play within that team in a certain way. So it was always like it was a test to see exactly who was above them. And Jae-hong would kind of pull away, but as we kind of change metas, like Overwatch is tended to do over the years, Anko's still going to be there from what we know, right? Unless there's some, heart attack, the law, as you guys had put it, who knows? But Anko, I would say that probably neck and neck with Soon, has the length of the career, has the dominance during a couple periods, doesn't seem to be slowing down anytime soon. I think we could see maybe that opinion change when it comes to Dallas Fuel's performance in Season 2. If they kind of blunder again, it's going to be up to the eye test for Anko if he can, still be within that running. But we'll see. We'll see what happens with Fuel.
Okay. We should probably mention one more name, though, that really stands to mind from Overwatch League Season 1, which is, of course, Jake from the Houston Outlaws. This video and all of the content on my channel is kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Gardner Wilson, James Harding, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, Travis Greb, Tristan Jones, and as always, a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to take part in an esports discussion with yours truly? Would you like teasers for some of my upcoming content? See who the guests are going to be. Do you want to ask me a question for my monthly video AMA? Perhaps you'd like to suggest a guest you'd like to see in my content or a topic to discuss. Well, if so, then put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.